続いて、全体会合4。
This is plenary session 4. How can business strengthen SDG actions in the COVID-19 era? Now I'd like to introduce to you the speakers of this session. First, from WBCSD, World Business Council for Sustainable Development, Managing Director and Senior Management Team, Mr. Filippo Veglio. And Head of Asia Pacific ESG Business Development, Trucost, part of S&P Global, Mr. Michael Salvatico. And Chair of Committee on Responsible Business Conduct and SDGs Promotion, Keidanren Director, Chairperson Sompo Japan Insurance Inc., Mr. FUTAMIYA Masaya. And Senior Policy Researcher, Sustainability Governance Center, IGES, Ms. Nobue Amanuma. Now I would like to hand over to Ms. Amanuma.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much for your kind introduction and good afternoon everyone. I am Amanuma, Senior Policy Researcher of Sustainability Governance Center, IGES. I would like to serve as a moderator for this session. So, how SDGs initiatives by businesses have been changed due to the COVID-19 and how they can enhance their SDGs initiatives going forward. I would like to discuss with the business representatives. We have 3 leaders from the world in the area of business. I would like to briefly introduce these speakers in the order of their presentations. First, Mr. FUTAMIYA Masaya, Chair of Committee on Responsible Business Conduct and SDGs Promotion, Keidanren Director and Chairman of Sompo Japan Insurance. Keidanren, as you know very well, is a major business group in Japan. It consists of major businesses as well as groups in Japan. It is very influential. And as for SDGs, Keidanren is urging member companies with the Business Code of Conduct to promote SDGs initiatives even before COVID-19. But with the start of COVID-19, how has these SDGs initiatives have changed and what would be the future direction going forward? I would like to ask FUTAMIYA-san to elaborate on these questions. And from WBCSD, we have Mr. Filippo Veglio joining us from Geneva. Thank you very much. It should be very early morning over there. WBCSD has around 200 global member companies. And it is a forum to discuss sustainabilities with those member companies. And we have those speakers who are overseeing not just one company, but from an overview of the companies. So, Filippo, thank you for joining. And Mr. Michael Salvatico is joining us from Sydney. Michael, thank you for joining us today. So he has a finance background and ESGs and SDGs and what companies are doing in these regards. He is very aware of it. So from that perspective, I'd like Michael to make contributions to this session. So I'd like to explain to you at this juncture, why is it that we are having this session? So let me show you my presentation. So as you are very aware, SDGs, or the 2030 Agenda, which also include SDGs, were adopted in 2015, and its implementation began in 2016. So we are in 2020, and the 2030 Agenda, including SDGs, need to be achieved by 2030. That is the deadline. We only have 10 years to go. So at this point in time, what is the progress of those goals and targets? There has been progress. However, there is much more to be done. So on this current course, we can't achieve those goals and targets. Therefore, back in 2019, the SDG Summit was held at the United Nations. The world leaders came together, and then they shared the sense of urgency to accelerate their actions. And then they decided a decade of action. This decade of action, which starts from 2020, for the next 10 years, what are to be done at all levels, which means at the global level and the national level and the local level and also the individual person's level, all of the stakeholders, politicians, administrators, businesses, schools, universities, and NGOs and individual persons, all of these stakeholders need to accelerate their efforts. And only through that, the 2030 Agenda or SDGs advocating transformation can be achieved. So that is the definition of the decade of action. Against this backdrop, COVID-19 started and the pandemic and the spread of infection started to occur. As you can see from this, the COVID-19 is relevant and impacting almost all of the SDGs goals, and all of these impacts are negative. For instance, in terms of health, there has been a lot of damage, loss of life. In terms of economy, this is the deepest recession since World War II. And also in the past 30 years, for the first time, the poverty is being reversed. There has been an increased number of people in poverty. It has been declining for decades, but now for the first time it's increasing. However, such crisis can also create window of opportunity. We have been on an unsustainable path, but now we can correct that unsustainable path into a sustainable path. So it presents window of opportunity. So how can we keep this window of opportunity towards more sustainability? What we are advocating is this triple R framework. The pandemic and its broad impact and immediate impacts need to be addressed in a short term. That's a response part of this triple R. And then in mid to long term, we need to have recovery from this crisis that is also needed. And that has to lead to redesigning of socioeconomic systems. It has to be more sustainable, more resilient, and also more inclusive. So a recovery path should lead to such transition. So a short-term, mid-term, and long-term path need to be aligned. And using this framework, and from this framework perspective, what global companies are doing to respond to COVID-19. So that is one point to be discussed. So the question of why is it that IGES is interested in businesses? We have always been involved in the global process of SDGs, and we are aware that businesses can play a very important role because without businesses, we can't achieve SDGs. We are aware of it, and that is why how SDGs are understood and how they are addressed by businesses. We have done research over years, and also we are generating research output that can benefit businesses in this regard. So we have a Global Compact Network Japan and collaboration with this organization, and we have these reports that have been jointly issued. And we are working on this COVID-19 response, which is going to be issued next year in 2021. We are working on this report right now, so please wait for that report. So together with the three panelists, I would like to cover these discussion topics. Number one, in what ways does COVID-19 represent a challenge and an opportunity for companies aiming to contribute to the SDGs? So that's number one. And number two, how can governments and researchers help companies turn that challenge into an opportunity in this decade of action? So other stakeholders, including governments and researchers, how can businesses work together towards more sustainability? And this triple R framework, how can we understand companies' initiatives? So these are the three discussion points. So that's my framing presentation. But without further ado, I'd like to give the floor over to Mr. FUTAMIYA to talk about what Keidanren is doing in this regard.
Thank you. This is FUTAMIYA speaking. I'd like to say thank you for giving me this opportunity. And the PowerPoints, could you put them up, please? Could you show my PowerPoints, please? Thank you. So targeting the attainment of the SDGs all over the world, various organizations were taking action, and then COVID-19 hit the world. And this pandemic, no one could have imagined that this would happen. And the whole world economy has been thrown into a recession. Not just that, but the weakest parts of society have been hit hard. And under capitalism, the discrepancies that were moving forward have now become even more clear. So mankind must once again review how globalization and capitalism should be fundamentally. I think this is a warning. But if we see this tight spot as an opportunity, then by changing our way of thinking through COVID-19, we can greatly revise the path that we've been taking for a people-centered world depicted by the SDGs. I think we have been given one last chance. At Keidanren, we have put our past growth strategies on hold for the time being. By creating Society 5.0, we will achieve sustainable capitalism. And we announced our new growth strategy for doing this on November 17th. And what's important is making the pie larger and correcting the disparity. And number 2 is investments for the future. Number 3 is from the 2030 ideal, we need to backcast or backtrack and clarify and implement actions. To make capitalism sustainable, we need multi-stakeholders' diverse requests. They must be welcomed, and we must create value together. Through digital transformation, we need to identify social issues, and diverse people's imagination and creativity should be combined for a problem-solving and value-creating creative society. That's Society 5.0, through which sustainable growth will become possible. Now, this Society 5.0 for SDGs. So to make this deeply rooted in our members' corporate behavior, the Keidanren in November 2017 amended the 10 action principles that member companies should comply with. This is our Charter of Corporate Behavior. And in addition, our member companies' innovations that contribute to the SDGs have been grouped into these 17 targets to form a collection of examples. This database is available on our special website to disseminate information. And the result of such actions, compared to the survey in fiscal 2018, integrating SDGs into business politics grew 4.2-fold, showing that SDG integration into policies and practices is moving forward steadily. So the Keidanren is calling for Society 5.0 for SDGs to move this further forward and build back better, unprecedented scale and methods in innovative fund investment, and partnerships with investors is necessary. At Keidanren, we have joint research with the world's largest government pension fund, Japan's GPIF, and with the University of Tokyo. And we released a report in March this year. The report says that through realization of Society 5.0, we will achieve SDGs. Under this concept, ESG investments will further evolve. Social problem-solving will be linked to business and investment opportunities. This kind of transformation is the aim of investments that will be expanded and promoted together. And the report cites what corporations and institutional investors believe are future megatrends and potential issues and challenges, and technologies for solving them. Automated driving, telemedicine, clean energy, and other business opportunities, and opportunities for collaboration with diverse organizations are also shown. Also, Keidanren, as a platform to promote common understanding with stakeholders and accelerate cooperation and actions, has created a PR video on Society 5.0 and collected videos from each member company in order to start our platform, Theatre 5.0. And towards a decarbonized society, Keidanren bravely continues to go after innovation in its initiative Challenge Zero, where net zero emissions technology innovation and their aggressive implementation and penetration, finance, and other specific challenge examples by Japanese companies, 346 challenges have been released. As you know, in Japan, Prime Minister Suga, following his October policy speech, in November at G20, he declared that to realize a decarbonized society, Japan will lead the international community. He declared his strong resolve. 2050 carbon neutral, as an international commitment, now has a clear positioning. Public-private and academic collaboration is gaining momentum. As the foundations of these efforts, the business world will cooperate closely with the government to powerfully promote Challenge Zero so that we can contribute to realizing a decarbonized society as soon as possible. At the risk of being repetitive, COVID-19 has, to achieve a sustainable, inclusive society depicted by the SDGs, this has given us one last chance. And without the action of all organizations, the SDGs will end up just a dream. The whole world must come together. Let's make the next decade not just a decade of action, but a decade for realizing the SDGs. And with this strong resolve, let us move forward together. That's what I am hoping for from the bottom of my heart. So for the time being, I'd like to stop there. Yes, thank you. So lastly, you were talking about not just action, but towards implementation and realizing the dreams. I think those are very powerful words. And despite COVID-19, compared to before, things are moving forward quite a bit. You talked about the Keidanren member companies and their efforts, and going forward, targeting the future. Companies, for them to further strengthen their SDG efforts. What are the areas they need to pay attention to? What are the approaches they need to pay attention to? Yes, thank you for your question. And I have a PowerPoint prepared to answer your question. So targeting the attainment of SDGs, and under COVID-19, what becomes more important is efforts for business and human rights. The Keidanren's Charter of Corporate Behavior, we held a questionnaire survey regarding this, and the results show that regarding the guiding principles for business and human rights, the companies that are doing this, I regret to say, come to only 36% of the whole. The Japanese government's National Action Plan was announced on October the 16th this year. And the guiding principles need to be more widely known and implemented. That's where the issues lie. Regarding business and human rights efforts, this is going to have a big impact on the company's international competitiveness, and we need to move forward with that in mind. And in order to do this, the top management need to show that they are serious. They need to show leadership. That's important. And the WBCSD's CEO guideline to human rights has 34 top management signing it. And in the second version, actually, in the beginning it was 34 people, but now we have 56 top management. That's an increase of 22. This means that there is a heightened awareness of business and human rights. This is one of the facts. However, in the future, we need to have even more top management at companies tackling this issue in earnest. Also, companies may identify human rights issues on their supply chains, but one company alone cannot solve this problem. So the counterparties on their supply chains and the related stakeholders, companies need to collaborate to tackle this issue. That's all. Thank you. So listening to what you said and what you were saying earlier on, collaboration with stakeholders is very important. I agree with you. And many companies and many industrial organizations are brought together by Keidanren, and your role is going to become even more important. That was the impression I got. Thank you very much. Next, Filippo-san, WBCSD. What do you think, or what are your efforts? Could you please let us know?
Good afternoon, Amanuma-san, and thank you so much to IGES, of course, for the kind invitation to the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Thank you not only for the invitation, but for the ongoing partnership. We are delighted to partner with you across several years now in advancing the sustainability agenda, in particular with regard to the business implications. Thank you also to FUTAMIYA-san for the insightful slides and for the partnership also with Keidanren. Of course, so thank you very much for those highlights that you provided. From my side, I will use a handful of slides to position the idea of business action in line with the Sustainable Development Goals and within the particular context of course, the pandemic, the tragic and impactful pandemic. If I could kindly ask the moderator to put the slides up, please. Thank you so much. So yes, from my side, the headline is time to transform. We really believe it is time to look beyond incremental changes to transformation. And there's a number of ideas that I would like to share within that particular regard. Next slide, please. We are highly appreciative for IGES's 3R framework, response, recovery, redesign. It is really, of course, a very useful framework to think through how we, as society, and in particular from the business community side, are going to be contributing to delivering long-term prosperity and resilience, not only for the planet, but also for, of course, the people, the billions of people living on it. We are facing undoubtedly, and science is telling us more than ever, with better data than ever, that we are facing a climate emergency. We are facing also, thanks to incredibly useful data, a biodiversity crisis, and that's nothing new. It is an accelerating trend on both ends. Unfortunately, in that process, also more and more people are being left behind. We have heard how COVID-19 has reversed gains, has reversed positive trends in poverty alleviation, unfortunately setting us back many, many years. So certainly the trend that many people are being left behind. And this COVID-19 really hitting us as a gray rhino. This is a term used by an academic called Michel Wucker, very useful to differentiate it from black swans, because unfortunately we did have warnings. We did have warnings about this kind of high impact threat that we actually know about, but choose as a society, including also perhaps as businesses, to ignore. And so it's sort of there are many warning signs out there about similar challenges out there in our social and environmental domain. And certainly the term grey rhino is something that we want to call attention to, that there are unfortunately issues that we need to have on our radar, also from the business side, that are going to hit us over the next few years, over the next decades, and therefore to be mindful of. Next slide, please. With regard to COVID-19, we have elaborated a number of thoughts around the impacts of this pandemic, the consequences of this pandemic. Very, very briefly, we have regrouped them around 5 issues. The key vulnerabilities exposed by this pandemic is, firstly, the idea that economic growth comes above everything else. So is it really the most sustainable model to deliver long-term resilience for people and the planet? Maybe a useful question to ask: if it comes at all above all else, at what cost does it also come? The inequality agenda has certainly been put very strongly on the map in terms of the social consequences of this pandemic, the inequality within countries, but also between countries, further tensions developing there. Unfortunately, from an institutional point of view, there has been perhaps less a collaboration, perhaps less of a systemic approach compared to the financial and resulting economic crisis of shortly more than a decade ago. There was an allusion to the 20 indeed taking place just a few days ago. Certainly less coordination we feel when it was really needed, in particular at the beginning stages, and hopefully the coordination will kick in stronger than ever now that is really needed as we head into another 2021 with a lot of uncertainty. Public health investment, certainly not ideal from all sorts of economies. The access to universal health coverage, but also the cost of investments in public health, perhaps not always taken into great account in light of these pandemic risks, but also the overall resilience of health systems. And last but not least, also from a business perspective, the pursuit of efficiency has perhaps come at cost to the pursuit of just-in-case scenarios, such as the COVID-19 calls for, meaning how do you build in more slack and planning into hyper-efficient supply chain, into hyper-efficient processes and movement of goods and services. So certainly something that we want to call the attention to. And for those who are interested, there's a lot more reading to be analyzed in that short report that we analyze. Next slide, please. In terms of the impact of COVID, I believe we have had an excellent overview by our colleagues of IGES in terms of the high and moderate, unfortunately, negative impact. Amanuma-san, you provided that slide up front. No need to go into greater detail, but certainly a worrying impact in terms of the facing this decade of action. We entered this decade of action with optimism that we could accelerate the needed actions there, and certainly high negative impacts or moderate levels of negative impact along a number of these SDGs. Next slide, please. Within that particular regard, our message from the World Business Council's side is that it's really important to keep the SDGs at the heart of the COVID-19 response. There was, in particular, in the early stages of the response, perhaps a discussion around is sustainability now stopped and we really must focus on the emergency. Of course, there is an emergency response that is immediately driven by the necessities of daily supplies, of daily emergencies, but the overall long-term trend, the overall long-term guiding star is provided from our point of view by these SDGs. It is, as we call it here, a ready-made universal framework that can help us realize our collective ambition of building forward better. And so let us keep the SDGs at the heart of the recovery and response mechanisms set up all throughout the world. And we're very encouraged by the signals from Japan, including, of course, a strong message from Keidanren around the SDGs, and we will continue to emphasize those messages within our community and networks. Next slide, please. Within that particular context, from a business perspective, we want to emphasize how important it is for companies to emphasize this SDG approach in terms of translating that framework into action, how to prioritize the action, how to make that prioritization process robust and transparent, and how to identify areas where companies can make a real impact in terms of a tangible, meaningful, material impact. And I know that Michael Salvatico will later on present us also with a tool that actually supports companies in that regard. We have elaborated, for those who are interested, a number of tips. We call them the top 10 tips for prioritization. There is not enough time to go into great detail, but very important there for companies to consider not only the positive contributions they can bring to society, but really carry out a principled prioritization process through which they can also look at where their negative impacts currently lie, how can they mitigate it, how can they be addressed in a business-focused way over and beyond innovation and processes and product services that are being developed in line with the SDGs framework. My last point, Amanuma-san, is on the next slide, please. It concerns our message around the need over and beyond of the integration of the SDGs, over and beyond of the drive and the determination to stick to the SDGs in the recovery and response mechanisms, is linked to a piece that we are currently developing also in collaboration with IGES. It's a piece called Vision 2050, really looking to the long-term trends, the long-term implications of the current business environment? How can business position its role, its opportunity, but also its responsibility to address these challenges? And we are calling for three particular mindset shifts with regard to the approaches that take place along a number of areas, the areas of energy, of transportation and mobility, of products and materials, of living spaces, of water and sanitation, of health and well-being, of food, of course. So all along these areas, keeping in mind these three R's. So we have, with respect to IGES, also our own little 3R framework with regard to three fundamental mindset shifts. Allow me very, very briefly to address them. The resilience aspect is really trying to move resilience beyond the idea of going back to the status quo ante, basically to the state of affairs as it was before, to embed a much more dynamic system of resilience in which, instead of resisting change, businesses anticipate, embrace, and adapt to the ever-recurring shocks that are kicking in across social and environmental systems. So really a strong link between resilience and the sustainability agenda. The reinvention element, the second R, points to the need to rethink the outcomes of capitalism. WBCC strongly believes in capitalism as a key element, as a key enabler to accelerate the necessary action. The efficiencies, the innovation, the competition brought about by a capitalist system are incredibly necessary to accelerate action, but the outcomes that we are striving for need to be optimized. How do we create more sustainable value? How do we create a capitalist system that rewards sustainable value creation and not only perhaps the current model that rewards value extraction only? So how do you internalize your impacts? How do you take into account the realities of the sustainability imperatives under which we are currently operating within the business environment? Last but not least, regeneration. We believe there is a long-term trend and a long-term need to take into account not only sort of a do no harm approach, which is in our view no longer enough. We really need to think from a business side how to take action to integrate, to realize the regeneration that both on the social and the environmental end is necessary to restore and to nourish social and environmental systems that businesses ultimately very strongly depend on. As we have always said, business cannot succeed in failed societies, and regeneration needs to be also the next sort of transformation in that regard. So with that said, Amanuma-san, I'm handing back to you and to our next speaker. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
はい、フィリッポさんありがとうございました。
Thank you very much, Filippo. So talking about the mindset shifts, that last slide is very interesting. Over here in Japan, SDGs are very much popular, familiarized right now. But then on the other hand, the 2030 agenda is very much focusing on transformation. But we haven't fully discussed the importance of transformation here in Japan. So it's not simply about the transformation of the organizational setup or the social setup, but we need to transform our mindset at the same time.
いたします。
Yes, indeed. We believe that kind of thinking can help lead a debate between public and private sector among various partners of the public and private sector, including, of course, academic partners like IGES. And we will be rolling out these frameworks throughout 2021 and looking forward to that dialogue also in Japan along these lines.
Thank you. はい、そう、次にマイケルさん。
Next, Michael-san, please.
Amanuma-san, thank you very much for the introduction and what great presentations we've had to this point. It's a pleasure to be here on the invitation of the US Chamber of Commerce. S&P Global is a proud member and an active member of the US Chamber of Commerce. And what I mean by that is that Doug Peterson, our president and CEO at S&P Global, is the current chairman of the US Chamber's US-Japan Business Council. So we work very closely with Japan and connecting Japan and US businesses. S&P Global is a company, and as you have heard, my presentation is to provide information about the importance of companies in achieving the SDGs. We at S&P Global, if we move to the next slide please. We at S&P Global are focused on analysing the SDGs as well as climate change, as well as the ESG behaviour of companies, and it is fundamental across our businesses. In fact, I would like to start by saying most of you on this conference would think about S&P as an index company, as one of the largest index providers in the world, or one of the largest ratings providers. But were you aware that sitting within S&P Global is a provider of data and analytics across fundamental analysis at the asset level that includes a wealth of information on ESG, and as well as that, our Platts business that provides information on resources and commodities, which are essential to ESG in general and relate back to the SDGs. The next slide, please. A key theme to our focus on the SDGs is also building back better, or building forward better, as Filippo had in his last slide. I like that. I'm going to use that, Filippo. I'm putting the SDGs central to how we think about our actions and our investments is becoming increasingly important as we move towards 2030, because we have a large target and goal ahead of us. Unlocking an assessed US $12 trillion in opportunities and 300 million jobs. Aligning with the SDGs or ESG or climate change is about providing solutions that are profitable, that achieve the goals and positive outcomes of sustainability. Next slide, please. In our analysis, we look at where SDG alignment, where progress for SDG alignment is most needed. So our starting point is looking at how companies can provide solutions, but also looking at from an SDG index provided by the SDSN, where that progress is going to be most additional. And if we move to the next slide, when we look at these companies, we analyze their revenues from products and services, and there are alignment of those revenues to the 169 targets set by the 17 SDGs. So we approach this looking at the framework and asking, what can we do to achieve the outcomes that we set out to identify and to research? And so with that granular assessment of company behavior matched to the 169 targets, when we analyze companies through that lens of what they're doing today, we see that most reported from the companies that we assess are goals 3, 8, 12, and 13, whereas the most SDG exposure comes from goals 6, 13, 15, and 17. And we're looking directly at the company information, what they report in their sustainability reports, what they release in their filings, and so we're analysing at a very granular level company behaviour. If we move to the next slide, please. What we find is that there's a relationship between the alignment to SDGs and to financial materiality. So if we look at this one example here, where we're looking at an electric utilities current SDG impacts and assessing them against SDG alignment and financial materiality, looking through the 17 goals, we see that on the low side of financial materiality, but at the mid-level are goals 1 and 2, whereas on the high side of financial materiality, goals 13 and goals 8, goal 7 as well. These relate to areas of climate change, of course, and we can see that goals 7 and 8 have high positive impact. And so this is this is showing that the SDG alignment or an SDG focus of companies is not just about alignment, but also can have an impact on financial materiality, which as an investor or a bank or an insurer or the company itself, these are important consequences to be aware of. The next slide, please. So developing the SDG framework, we look very closely, as I say, at companies, and we're analysing each of the 17 goals and scoring the goals. What we can provide at the overall company level is an SDG evaluation. That SDG evaluation can be done on alignment with SDGs. It can be done on additionality of the products and services provided by the company, and on the risk exposure being the negative. So the consequences of do no harm are captured by that. So we're looking at it through 3 different lenses and providing a score on companies. Last slide, please. So in S&P Global, through our analysis of companies in the market intelligence Trucost specialist area, where we're not just focused on servicing information to investors, but we're also providing information to companies as well, to governments and regulators, covering the full spectrum of the economy. When we look in particular from an investment perspective, so we're marrying the index part of S&P and in this case, taking the S&P Topics 150 and the S&P Global 1200, and we're using that analysis that you saw in previous slides on the 17 SDGs, looking at the companies and summing up the company's alignment for each one of the 17 goals to the index level. What we can see is that, well, the topics, companies in the topics have a high alignment to decent work and economic growth. Surprisingly, it's lower than the S&P Global 1200, whereas for good health and well-being, the S&P Topics is well above its exposure when we're looking at SDG aligned revenues per $1 million than the S&P Global 1200. And we can see similar trends there, for instance, for gender equality. Look how much higher the topics is in terms of alignment with gender equality than the S&P Global 1200. Maybe I would say also that might have been surprising, except I've through my observation, I've seen that is an important goal that's been highlighted by investors in Japan. So maybe this is a reflection here of the output or success or increased alignment to that focus. I'm going to stop there. Plenty that I could continue to talk about, but let's put it back to the panel. Thank you.
はい、マイケルさん、ありがとうございます。
Thank you, Michael. So we are excited with the presentations. We've had some very exciting presentations and we have no time left. So lastly, maybe we could ask each of you. So after listening to the presentations of the others, what did you think? Maybe you could give us your thoughts and maybe your comments. You have 1 minute each. So FUTAMIYA-san, please. Yes, thank you for today. There's a lot of things I want to talk about. I want to summarize. So the SDGs, the foundations of this is the people-centric approach and people security. These are all, we see international consensus regarding this. And this is part of Japan's national strategy. It's the backbone of Japan's strategy. This is something that cannot waver. For companies, this is like a code of conduct or a charter of behavior. So the crisis we're facing now, and in the future, there may be future crises. And with scientific basis, we need to look at the truth. And we need to get this widely accepted among the people and create an environment for overcoming this. That's the responsibility of the countries, and it's a responsibility of the leaders. And within the planetary boundaries, how can we enjoy a bountiful life, improve the quality of life, and feel the improvement? So by changing values, we can bring this into reality. So there are things that are not visible, and we need to shift our values. That's important. And under COVID-19, people should seriously tackle COVID-19. This is a warning, and it comes with pain. This is something that's been shown to us. This should never happen again. And we need to be determined and have strong resolve. That's all. Thank you. Thank you.
フィリポさん。
Thank you, Filippo, please.
On FUTAMIYA-san's remarks and keep it very, very short. Of course, we are entering the decade of action. We have entered the decade of action. We would like to perhaps call it the decade of transformation. We really need to think beyond action. What is really the transformative action? What is the roadmap that the SDGs give us, the roadmap for action and for transformation in line with the challenges of society that we face, and even more so in light of COVID-19, as FUTAMIYA-san articulated. We believe there are ample opportunities, but also important responsibilities and roles for business to drive change. Also driving change within their own environment by integrating these realities into company strategies and sustainability planning. And we are thankful for tools such as the one of S&P presented by Michael, and there are many more discussions and debates to be had. Unfortunately, time is short, but we are determined to play our role as World Business Council in partnership also with IGES. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。マイケルさん、お願いします。
Thank you. I'm encouraged and enthused by the presentations that we've seen from the other two presenters today. Great frameworks to follow, and that's what the world needs. I mean, essentially, we're at a pivotal time in the history of finance, and if you look at the consequences of climate change and the broader environmental and social issues and of sustainability, we're seeing a reaction from companies and from the financial institutions. The realization will impact investors, banks, insurers, companies across all industries, across the entire world. The whole world is impacted by climate change and environmental issues, and the SDGs are there to provide one framework that's broad, that captures the equality issues that we see addressed by investors and companies who are focused on sustainability. I think many organizations have acknowledged the need to consider the longer term sustainability issues. We've seen the adoption of frameworks like the TCFD on climate change. I want to see the same focus on the SDGs as well. And I think one of the factors for the investment community is, well, I've seen a lot of activity and we've seen a lot of companies reporting. Our research would indicate that there's still a lot of action that we need to take. So rather than resting on our laurels and being proud of what we've done, let's use these frameworks to accelerate our efforts on the SDGs, ESG and climate change. Thank you.
はい、ありがとうございます。マイケルさんの
Thank you. So Michael's final comments, I think that was very good at wrapping up this session. And today, from our three discussants from different perspectives with different experiences, you came together. And with COVID-19, this should be the opportunity or trigger for us to move forward further with the SDGs. I think we have reached agreement. And going forward, in going after transformation, we need to shift our mindset. We need to shift our values. And going forward, this is going to be the key to our behavior. And in Michael's presentation, you talked about what kind of tools are available, what kind of frameworks are available. He gave us some specific hints. So I'm afraid I've overrun our time by 5 minutes, but thank you very much for taking part. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
ご登壇者の皆様、ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much to all of our discussants. And with this, we would like to end our plenary session 4. Thank you. The next session will begin in 15 minutes from 4 o'clock Japan time and Central European time 8 o'clock. So thank you very much and see you later.